The battlefield stretched endlessly across the plains of Teloria, a world scorched by war. Smoke billowed into the air, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the relentless roar of artillery fire. Once a verdant paradise, Teloria was now a graveyard of ambition and betrayal. Amidst the chaos lay Queen Lysara of the Xylath Empire, her once imposing figure slumped against the wreckage of a shattered war machine. Her golden armor, tarnished and dented, bore the marks of countless battles. The sigil of her empire, a silver phoenix, was barely visible beneath the blood and grime. Betrayed by her own generals who sought power over loyalty, Lysara had been left for dead during a critical skirmish. Her efforts to broker peace had made her a target, her vision for unity clashing with the ambitions of warlords who thrived in chaos. The queen's breathing was labored, her wounds severe. Her enemies, the Threxon Collective, had left her to die, not out of mercy, but because they deemed her no longer a threat. Yet, even in her weakened state, her silver eyes burned with defiance. She refused to let her story end here, abandoned and forgotten on a foreign battlefield. The sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. Too weak to lift her weapon, she braced herself for the final blow. But the figure that emerged from the smoke was not a soldier. It was a human, clad not in armor, but in the distinctive uniform of a medic. Dr. Seelan Thorne crouched beside the wounded queen, his expression a mix of concern and determination. The human medic was a rare presence on Teloria, part of a neutral galactic peace coalition unit deployed to assist civilians and non-combatants. Yet here he was, kneeling before one of the most feared and revered figures in the galaxy. "Don't move," Kalen said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He pulled a scanner from his medkit, running it over Lysara's injuries. The results were grim. Fractured ribs, severe lacerations, and internal bleeding. Her chances of survival were slim without immediate intervention. Lysara's lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A human? Why?" Seelan met her gaze, his dark eyes unwavering. "Because someone has to. Now stop talking and let me work." Ignoring the danger around him, Seelan began stabilizing her wounds. He injected a coagulant serum to slow the bleeding and applied a portable field wrap to her side. His hands moved with practiced precision, each motion driven by a deep-seated belief in the sanctity of life. "Why waste your time?" Lysara murmured, her voice tinged with both curiosity and bitterness. "I am no ally to your kind." Seelan glanced at her, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "And I'm not here to make allies. I'm here to save lives. Yours included. Now, do me a favor and stop arguing." Despite her pain, a faint smile tugged at the corners of Lysara's lips. She had faced countless warriors on the battlefield, yet this human's determination was unlike anything she had encountered. It was almost refreshing. The ground shook as an explosion erupted nearby, sending a shower of dirt and debris into the air. Kalen shielded Lysara with his body, his instincts overriding his fear. "We need to get out of here," he said, scanning the area for a safe route. The faint sound of engines drew his attention to a nearby transport, partially buried under rubble but still intact. He activated his comm device, calling for evac support. "This is Dr. Thorne. I've got a critical patient. Need immediate extraction at Grid 24 Gamma." "Negative, Doctor," came the reply. "Zone is too hot. You're on your own." Seelan muttered a curse under his breath. He looked down at Lysara, who had slipped into unconsciousness. Time was running out. Gritting his teeth, he hoisted her onto his back, her weight a testament to the heavy armor she wore. "You're not dying here," he said firmly, more to himself than to her. "Not today." With the battlefield erupting around him, Seelan moved toward the transport, each step a struggle against the oppressive heat and his own exhaustion. The odds were against him, but he had made a promise to himself long ago: no one gets left behind. Not even a queen. The battlefield was a chaotic tapestry of fire, smoke, and the metallic groans of war machines collapsing under their own weight. Dr. Seelan Thorne trudged through the wreckage with Queen Lysara strapped to his back, her golden armor weighing heavily on his shoulders. The queen's unconscious form felt like a furnace against his already strained muscles, but he pressed forward. Each step was a battle in itself. The ground trembled under the relentless bombardment from the opposing forces. Plasma bolts streaked across the sky, their brilliant blue arcs briefly illuminating the devastation below. Seelan moved with calculated haste, ducking behind debris and maneuvering through the labyrinth of destruction. Every movement felt like a gamble, each second threatening to tip the balance between survival and death. Lysara stirred weakly against his back, her voice a faint rasp. Why? Why are you doing this? She managed, her words barely audible over the roar of the battlefield. Kalen didn't slow down. Because someone has to, he replied, his tone clipped but resolute. And because I'd rather not explain to history why I let a queen bleed out on the battlefield. Her attempt at a chuckle turned into a cough, blood staining her lips. A noble fool, you're kind, always surprising. They reached the battered remains of the transport Keelan had spotted earlier. Its hull was charred, the cockpit window shattered, but the engine's faint hum suggested it could still run. He set Lysara down gently, leaning her against the side of the vehicle as he began inspecting the damage. You're lucky I'm also good with machines, he muttered, pulling a multi-tool from his medkit. Luck or fate, Lysara murmured, her silver eyes flickering open just enough to watch him work. Human, your name? Dr. Seelan Thorne, he said without looking up. But you can call me Seelan, seeing as how I just carried you out of a war zone. Lysara's lips twitched into a faint smile. Seelan, fitting. You fight like a warrior, heal like a sage. Flattery won't get you off this planet faster, he quipped, his focus on rewiring the transport's power system. The roar of engines and the clanking of boots in the distance signaled approaching danger. Seelan worked faster, his heart pounding. Stay awake, he told Lysara. I'm going to need you conscious when we get out of here. I have little choice, she replied, though her voice was growing weaker. The transport sputtered to life, its systems flickering but operational. Kalen climbed into the pilot's seat, quickly configuring the controls. We're moving. Hold on. With a lurch, the transport rose off the ground, its engines straining under the weight of its damaged hull. Seelan steered it low, weaving through the battlefield in an effort to avoid detection. Plasma fire occasionally lit up the sky behind them, but the chaotic environment worked to their advantage, providing ample cover. Almost there, Seelan muttered, though he had no real destination in mind beyond getting out of the immediate combat zone. His focus was on keeping them alive long enough to figure out the next step. As the transport sped through the remnants of the battlefield, Lysara began to regain more of her strength. Though her injuries were still severe, her indomitable spirit shone through. She sat upright, gripping the edge of her seat for support. You don't understand what you've done, she said, her voice gaining steadiness. By saving me, you've made yourself a target. The Zyklari Council, they won't let this stand. Kalen glanced at her, his expression resolute. I didn't save you to win a popularity contest. Let them come. I'll figure it out. Her silver eyes narrowed, studying him as though searching for weakness. You're reckless. Bold, but reckless. Call it what you want, Seelan said, but it got you off that battlefield alive. Their conversation was cut short as the transport sensors beeped, indicating an approaching threat. A Zyklari patrol ship appeared on the horizon, its sleek, predatory design unmistakable. The ship's cannons charged, their glow a harbinger of destruction. Of course, Teelan muttered. Why wouldn't they send the cavalry? Lysara's gaze sharpened, her warrior instincts overriding her exhaustion. They'll fire to disable us, not destroy. They want me alive. Good to know, Kalen said, but I'd rather not give them the chance. He pushed the transport's engines to their limit, veering into a canyon carved by centuries of tectonic activity. The narrow walls provided cover, but also demanded precise maneuvering. Kalen's hands gripped the controls tightly, his reflexes tested with every twist and turn. You're flying us into a death trap, Lysara remarked, though there was a hint of admiration in her tone. Better a death trap than sitting ducks, Seelan shot back. The patrol ship followed, its cannons firing intermittently as it tried to corner them. One shot grazed the transport's rear, sending a shudder through the cabin. Alarms blared, but Kalen remained focused, his mind racing for solutions. Do you have any combat experience? He asked Lysara, his voice tinged with urgency. More than you can imagine, she replied, her expression hardening. Good, Seelan said, pointing to the weapon controls. Because I need you to cover our backs while I keep us from crashing. Lysara didn't hesitate. She moved to the weapon station, her movements slow but deliberate. The controls felt familiar in her hands, a reminder of the countless battles she had commanded. She targeted the patrol ship, her aim steady despite her condition. "Firing," she announced, pressing the trigger. A burst of plasma fire erupted from the transport's rear cannons, striking the patrol ship's left wing. The enemy vessel faltered, its flight path becoming erratic. "Nice shot," Ceylon said, a grin breaking through the tension. "It's not over," Lysara warned, her eyes locked on the target. "Keep flying." The transport burst out of the canyon into open terrain, the patrol ship still trailing behind but struggling to regain control. Lysara fired again, this time hitting the ship's engine. The resulting explosion lit up the sky, and the patrol ship spiraled out of sight. The sudden quiet was almost deafening. Kalen slowed the transport, his hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. "That was close," he said, glancing at Lysara. She sank back into her seat, her breathing heavy but steady. "You fly well, Ceylon, reckless but effective." He chuckled softly. "You're not bad yourself. Remind me not to get on your bad side." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lysara allowed herself a faint smile. "You already have, and yet, here we are." As the transport moved toward the horizon, leaving the battlefield behind, both human and Queen understood that their fight was far from over. But for now, they had survived, and survival was the first step to reclaiming their future. The transport hummed as it soared through the vast desert plains, leaving behind the battlefield's chaos. Dr. Ceylon Thorne glanced at the monitors, scanning for signs of pursuit. The destruction of the patrol ship had bought them time, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Zyklari Council wouldn't let Queen Lysara's escape go unanswered. "How far can this thing take us?" Lysara asked, her voice stronger now, but still tinged with exhaustion. "Far enough," Ceylon replied, adjusting the controls. "There's an old mining station about 20 clicks from here. It's abandoned, but it should have enough power left to keep us hidden while I stabilize your condition." Lysara leaned back, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. Her body was still racked with pain, but her mind was sharpening. She was no longer just surviving. She was planning. "And after that? What's your grand strategy, human?" Kalen smirked, his gaze steady. "One step at a time, Your Majesty. Let's keep you alive first." The mining station came into view, a rusting relic of a bygone era. Its skeletal frame jutted out from the rocky terrain, partially buried by years of sandstorms. Kalen set the transport down near the entrance, the landing smoother than the state of the vehicle suggested. He powered down the engines and turned to Lysara. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his medkit and stepping out into the hot, dry air. The station's main doors groaned as he forced them open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air was stale, but the environment was intact enough to be usable. After securing the area, Kalen returned to the transport and helped Lysara inside. The med bay Keelan assembled within the station's old control room was rudimentary but functional. Lysara lay on a makeshift cot, her golden armor set aside to reveal the bandages covering her injuries. Keelan worked methodically, applying regenerative salves and monitoring her vitals. "You've done this before," Lysara remarked, her tone neutral but observant. "More times than I'd like to admit," Keelan replied without looking up. "Field medicine doesn't exactly allow for perfection. You make do with what you've got." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "And what drives you, human? Why risk so much for someone you barely know?" Kalen paused, meeting her gaze. "Because someone has to. I've seen what happens when people stop caring. I'm not letting that happen on my watch." Lysara's lips twitched into a faint smile. A noble answer, perhaps too noble. "Maybe," he said, returning to his work. "But it's who I am." As days passed, Lysara's strength began to return. Her injuries, though severe, healed faster than expected under Keelan's care. The regenerative salves worked wonders on her skin, and the hydration serums restored her vitality. Yet it wasn't just her body that was recovering, it was her spirit. One evening, as Keelan ran diagnostics on the transport's damaged systems, Lysara approached him. She moved slowly, but with a grace that hinted at her former self. Her silver eyes were sharp, her voice steady. "Your skills extend beyond medicine," she said, nodding toward the dismantled engine. "You're full of surprises, Halen Thorne." He glanced at her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Fieldwork makes you a jack of all trades. I wouldn't call it a surprise, just necessity." She tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "And yet, Necessity doesn't explain your courage. I've seen men crumble under far less than what you've faced. Kalen shrugged, returning to his work. I don't think about it much. You just do what needs to be done. Lysara watched him for a moment longer before speaking again. Your people, they're often underestimated in this galaxy, but you've shown me otherwise. Thanks, he said, his tone genuine. But I didn't save you to prove anything. I saved you because it was the right thing to do. That night, as they sat around a small heater in the control room, Lysara began to share more of her story. She spoke of her betrayal, the Council's fear of her attempts at diplomacy, and the enemies she had made within her own empire. I ruled with strength, she said, her voice heavy with regret. It was all I knew. But strength without wisdom breeds rebellion. I see that now. Kalen listened, his expression thoughtful. You tried to broker peace. That doesn't sound like someone who only knows strength. Her gaze softened. Peace was my goal, but my methods, they were flawed. I fought for unity, but I failed to see the cracks forming beneath me. And now, Seelan asked, leaning forward, what do you want now? She hesitated, the weight of her past and the uncertainty of her future pressing down on her. I want to make amends, to rebuild what was lost, but the galaxy will not forgive so easily. Seelan nodded, his eyes steady. Then let's start with surviving. You can't rebuild anything if you're dead. The next morning, the sound of distant engines broke their quiet reprieve. Kalen's heart sank as the station's sensors picked up approaching ships. The Zyklari had found them. Looks like our time's up, he said, grabbing his gear. Lysara stood, her movements slow but deliberate. Then we fight. Together. Seelan glanced at her, a grin tugging at his lips despite the danger. I wouldn't have it any other way. The battle for their freedom was just beginning. The sound of distant engines reverberated through the abandoned mining station. A low, ominous hum that grew steadily louder. Dr. Seelan Thorne and Queen Lysara stood in the control room, their eyes locked on the flickering display of a battered tactical scanner. 4 red blips appeared on the screen. Zyklari patrol ships, their paths converging on the station. They've found us, Seelan muttered, gripping the edge of the console. His mind raced as he calculated their dwindling options. The mining station's defenses were non-existent, and the transport he had barely repaired was no match for a squadron of Zyklari interceptors. Lysara, now standing with the aid of a staff she had fashioned from the remnants of a mining tool, squared her shoulders. Though her body still bore the marks of her recent injuries, her silver eyes gleamed with the fire of a warrior queen. We cannot outrun them, not in our current state. No, Seelan agreed, but we can outthink them. He tapped furiously on the console, bringing up a schematic of the station. The layout was simple, an array of tunnels leading to the central control room and a few storage bays. Most of the station's equipment had long since been stripped, but Seelan's sharp eyes caught something promising. The geothermal core, he said, pointing to the map. It's still active. If we can overload it, the resulting energy pulse will fry their systems, temporarily at least. Lysara's gaze narrowed as she studied the map. You're suggesting we use the station as a trap. Exactly, Kalen replied, but we'll need to lure them inside. Once they're close enough, we overload the core and escape in the transport while their systems are down. She tilted her head, considering his plan. It's risky. If the core detonates before we escape, we'll be buried here. Better than letting them take us alive, Keelan said firmly. You've got a better idea, Your Majesty? Lysara smirked faintly. None as bold, Doctor. Let's make it work. The two set to work, their movements purposeful and synchronized, despite the mounting tension. Lysara, leaning on her makeshift staff for support, assisted Kalen in rigging the station's geothermal core for overload. The task was daunting. The core's systems were ancient and barely functional, and the risk of premature detonation was ever present. As they worked, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the station's corridors. The Zyklari soldiers had landed and were beginning their search. Kalen glanced at Lysara, his pulse quickening. They're here. Good, she said, her voice cold and steady. Let them come. The soldiers moved cautiously through the dimly lit tunnels, their weapons raised. Their leader, a tall, stern-faced Zyklari named Commander Rythan, barked orders through their comms. The Queen is priority 1. She is to be captured alive. Kill the human if necessary. Unbeknownst to them, Lysara and Keelan were watching from the control room's surveillance feed. They underestimate us, Lysara remarked, her tone laced with disdain. Let's keep it that way, Keelan replied, activating the station's rudimentary security systems. Doors slammed shut behind the soldiers, cutting off their escape routes. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in an eerie glow, adding to the confusion. The trap was set. The geothermal core hummed with dangerous intensity, its systems nearing critical overload. Salen wiped sweat from his brow as he worked on stabilizing the timing mechanism. 2 minutes, he said, his voice strained. We need to be out of here by then. Lysara stood by the doorway, her plasma pistol raised. Though she was still regaining her strength, her aim was steady, her warrior instincts sharp. The soldiers will not wait for us to leave. As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots grew louder. The Ziklari had breached the outer defenses and were closing in. Lysara took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the pistol. Go, she said to Keelan. Finish what you need to do. I will hold them here. Keelan looked up, his expression incredulous. Are you insane? You're in no condition to fight. She smirked, a glint of defiance in her eyes. I've fought in worse conditions, Doctor. Trust me. For a moment, they stared at each other, the gravity of the situation hanging between them. Finally, Keelan nodded. Don't get yourself killed, he said, his voice softer. I don't plan to, she replied, turning her attention to the approaching enemy. The first wave of Ziklari soldiers entered the control room, their weapons blazing. Lysara moved with surprising agility, using the limited cover to her advantage. Her shots were precise, each one finding its mark. Despite her weakened state, she fought with the ferocity of a queen unwilling to surrender. Keelan, meanwhile, finished the final adjustments to the core. The countdown began, the display flashing ominously. 90 seconds. Time to go, he shouted, grabbing his gear. Lysara fell back toward him, her movements deliberate as she fired her remaining shots. The transport? She asked, her breath coming in short bursts. Ready and waiting, Keelan replied. But we've got to move, now. The two sprinted through the corridors, the distant sound of the geothermal core's rising hum spurring them on. Behind them, the Ziklari soldiers regrouped, their pursuit relentless. Plasma bolts streaked past, narrowly missing their targets. As they reached the transport bay, Keelan threw open the hatch and climbed into the pilot's seat. Lysara followed, collapsing into the co-pilot's chair with a groan. You'd better have a plan for the ones still outside. I do, Salen said, flipping a series of switches. The transport's rear cannons powered up, their targeting systems locking onto the patrol ships parked nearby. Let's make some noise. The cannons fired, their blasts tearing through the Ziklari ships with precision. Explosions lit up the bay, forcing the remaining soldiers to scatter. With the path clear, Keelan launched the transport, its engines roaring as it shot out of the bay and into the open desert. Behind them, the mining station's core reached critical mass. A blinding flash lit up the sky, followed by a massive shockwave that rippled across the plains. The transport trembled, but held steady as Keelan pushed it to its limits. In the co-pilot's seat, Lysara watched the explosion fade in the distance, her expression unwritable. You did it, she said finally, her voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. We did it, Keelan corrected, glancing at her with a faint smile. But they'll be back. Lysara nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with determination. Let them come. They will find us ready. As the transport sped into the horizon, leaving the wreckage behind, the bond between the human medic and the alien queen solidified. Their fight was far from over, but together, they had become a force to be reckoned with. The Star Healer, battered but functional, streaked through the endless void of space. The aftermath of the mining station's explosion had bought Dr. Keelan Thorne and Queen Lysara precious time, but they knew the Ziklari wouldn't stop their pursuit. The Queen's survival had become more than a personal vendetta. It was a matter of political control for her enemies. Inside the ship, Keelan adjusted the controls, the soft hum of the engine filling the cabin. Lysara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her silver eyes fixed on the star chart displayed on the console. Her injuries were healing rapidly thanks to Keelan's care, but the tension in her posture betrayed her unease. 2 patrols converging on our last known position, Keelan said, his voice tight as he analyzed the incoming data. They're triangulating. We've got to stay unpredictable. Lysara nodded, her fingers tracing the routes on the star chart. There's a dense asteroid field nearby, she said. We can use it to evade their sensors. Smart, Kalen replied, punching in the coordinates. But that'll only buy us so much time. What's the plan after that? Lysara leaned back, her expression unreadable. We need allies. If I am to reclaim my place and expose the Council's betrayal, I cannot do it alone. Kalen glanced at her. You've got one ally right here, but I'm guessing you're talking about a fleet or two. She allowed herself a faint smile. Your loyalty is commendable, Doctor. But yes, I'll need more than just one brave medic. As the Star Healer entered the asteroid field, the ship's alarms blared, warning of dangerous proximity to the massive rocks tumbling through space. Kalen's hands moved deftly over the controls, guiding the ship through the labyrinth with practiced precision. How many of these death traps do you know about? He asked, his tone light despite the tension. Enough, Lysara replied, her gaze sharp as she scanned the display for potential hazards. This one is called the Veil of Chaos. Few dare to enter. Fitting name, Seelan muttered as the ship narrowly avoided a collision. Let's hope it lives up to its reputation. The asteroid field proved to be a formidable obstacle for their pursuers. The Zyklari patrol ships struggled to navigate the dense maze, their larger frames making them vulnerable to the debris. One ship miscalculated and was crushed by a massive boulder, its explosion sending shockwaves through the field. That should slow them down, Seelan said, a hint of relief in his voice. But not for long, Lysara warned. We must keep moving. Their escape through the Veil of Chaos led them to Corinth Prime, a neutral planet known for its sprawling markets and underground networks. The bustling world was a hub for outlaws, traders, and mercenaries, an ideal place to disappear or to rally support. Kalen landed the Star Healer in a discreet docking bay, its exterior covered in dust to avoid attracting attention. This place doesn't scream safe haven, he remarked, powering down the ship. It's not meant to, Lysara replied, her tone brisk. But it's where we'll find what we need. The crowded markets of Corinth Prime were a cacophony of languages and smells, the air thick with the hum of activity. Lysara, her regal demeanor tempered by the need for discretion, walked beside Kalen through the throng. The former queen moved with purpose, her presence commanding attention despite her efforts to blend in. Who are we looking for? Seelan asked, his hand resting on the compact blaster at his hip. An old ally, Lysara said. If he is still alive, he will help us. Their search led them to a dimly lit cantina at the edge of the market. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and the sound of low conversations. Lysara scanned the room, her gaze landing on a grizzled Zyklari male sitting alone at a corner table. Renar Vex, she said, approaching him. The man looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Lysara, he said, his voice low. I thought you were dead. Not yet, she replied, but I need your help. Renar leaned back, studying her, and then Seelan. And who's your human companion? A bodyguard? A medic, Seelan said, stepping forward, and the reason she's not dead. Reinar's lips twitched into a faint smirk. Interesting. What do you want, Lysara? She leaned in, her voice firm. The Council betrayed me. They've turned the Empire into a shadow of what it once was. I aim to expose their corruption and reclaim what is mine. Reinar's expression darkened. That's a dangerous game. I don't expect it to be easy, Lysara said. But you were loyal to me once. Will you stand with me again? With Reinar's reluctant agreement, they began assembling a small but formidable team of mercenaries and loyalists. Weapons were acquired, strategies devised, and plans put into motion. The goal was clear: infiltrate the Zyklari Council's headquarters and broadcast their crimes to the galaxy. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. As they prepared to leave Corinth Prime, a fleet of Zyklari warships appeared in orbit, their arrival sending the city into chaos. The Council had tracked them down. This is it, Kalen said, gripping the controls of the Star Healer as the first barrage of plasma fire lit up the sky. We either win here, or we don't make it out. Lysara stood beside him, her voice steady. Then we fight together. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. The mercenaries held off the Council's ground forces while Kalen and Lysara coordinated their attack from the ship. Despite the odds, their combined efforts began to turn the tide. In a daring move, Lysara led a ground assault on the Council's flagship, infiltrating its command center with Reinar and a handful of allies. The battle within was brutal, but her determination was unshakable. She confronted the Council leader, a once loyal advisor who had orchestrated her downfall. "You betrayed the Empire," Lysara said, her voice cold. "You betrayed me, and you were weak," the advisor spat. "The Empire needed strength, not sentiment." Lysara's response was swift and final, her blade cutting through the air with precision. The Council leader fell, and with him, the last remnants of the conspiracy. Back on the Star Healer, Seelan monitored the situation, his heart pounding as Lysara's voice came through the comms. "The Council is defeated. The broadcast begins now." Moments later, her message echoed across the galaxy, exposing the Council's corruption and calling for a new era of unity and justice. The tides had turned, and Lysara's redemption was complete. As the dust settled, Kaelin and Lysara stood side by side on the bridge of the Star Healer, the stars stretching out before them. "What now?" he asked. "Now," Lysara said, her gaze steady, "we rebuild, together."